We do have breaking news. Los Angeles could become the largest school district in the nation to require vaccinations for students 12 and older. A vote is planned for today. In the meantime, President Biden will lay out his administration's revamped approach to ending the pandemic. Joining us now is White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Good morning, Jen. Thank you so much for being with us. Look, the breaking news out of Los Angeles is big. It directly impacts thousands of children soon and could influence the course for millions of others. What is the White House view about schools? Good for them?
Good for them. Absolutely, John. Look, we know it works in schools. We know that getting your kids vaccinated if they're 12 and older works. We know having more adults, teachers, people who are working in schools works. And for kids who are under 12, the best thing we can do is ensure that every adult around them is vaccinated. And that this type of a step is a step toward that. So definitely a positive sign.
Does the White House encourage school districts or states around the country to put in vaccine mandates for 12-year-olds and older?
Well, look, every school is going to make their own decision, but certainly putting in place requirements that would increase the number of people who are vaccinated, decrease the number of people who are unvaccinated around kids is a step forward and something, yes, we've been encouraging.
Will the White House take federal action in order to get more school districts to do this?
Well, it's always up to local school districts to put in place requirements, whatever they are. There's a role that leaders in states can play. There's a role that civic leaders can play. And sure, there's a role the President of the United States can play as well. He's going to speak later today on this. But putting in place additional requirements to ensure more people are vaccinated, kids are protected, parents can feel calmer about sending their kids to school, something that's key for mental health, emotional health. That certainly is a part of his speech later this afternoon.
So the speech today, can I ask, it's a 6-point plan, or we're told there are 6 broad areas, but what's the overall goal here?
Well, the overall goal is to speak directly to the American people about what's next on COVID. And we know that while there's been a range of issues that we've all been discussing that are also vitally important, whether it's Afghanistan or the Build Back Better agenda, that most people in this country, COVID and addressing COVID, returning to some version of normalcy is their number 1, 2, and 3 issue. So he'll talk a little bit about the progress we've made, John, but he'll also talk about what's next. That includes getting more people who are unvaccinated vaccinated. That means reducing hospitalizations. That means putting in place more testing requirements and putting in place more protections in the form of boosters to make sure people have an even greater level of protection. That's what the president will talk about. And he also will acknowledge the fact that the 175 million people who are vaccinated out there, many of them are frustrated. They want to go back to normal. Of course they do. And that is going to require moving more unvaccinated people to a vaccinated status. So that's what he'll talk about.
We heard Howard Stern. We just heard Michael Smerconish on the show before, Jim Justice in West Virginia, Republican governor. And they're sick of, sort of, I'm paraphrasing here, coddling the unvaccinated. Where's the White House on this?
They're not alone. And I think that is reflective of millions of Americans across the country. Now, we don't want this to be a vaccinated versus unvaccinated issue. That's not what we're aiming toward or what we're looking to do here. But what we are focused on doing is protecting more people. And you started our interview here talking about kids who are under 12. We know it works. We know if they're surrounded by adults who are vaccinated, they're going to be better protected. We know how to protect people who are immunocompromised. We know how we can safely go back to sporting events. We know how we can safely go back to concerts. And people are sick and tired of waiting. So we know requirements work. We've put in place some mandates over the past couple of months for components of the federal government. Many big companies have put in place requirements. We've seen them work. They've also become more popular, in part because probably vaccinated people want to return to some version of normal.
If I can, I want to run through a couple major overnight developments on different fronts that I want to get the White House position on. Well, we learned that there is a plane in Kabul that will be leaving at some point carrying as many as 200 people, including some Americans, leaving for Doha. What can you tell us about this?
Well, I can't get into any specific details for security reasons, John, but what I can tell you is that one of our focuses, the focus of our Secretary of State, who's been on the ground the last couple of days, and our diplomats who are in the region, we're working overtime every night, all night, is to get these planes, get this airport operational. In Qatar, the Qatari Airlines, they have been a key partner in this. So what we're working to do is be able to get flights in and out of the airport to help people who want to depart, American citizens, legal permanent residents, people who are eligible for different programs we have from the United States, special immigrant visa programs, and others. So this is what we've been working toward every moment of every day, and it's something we hope will be instrumental moving forward.
The Wall Street Journal reports that the Biden administration is going to sue Texas to try to stop their new near abortion ban from continuing. What can you tell us about this?
Well, the president, on the day this announcement was made in Texas, the president made pretty clear to the Department of Justice, to the Department of Homeland Health and Human Services, that they were to do everything they could to protect a woman's right to health care, a woman's right to choose. So there were steps the Department of Justice announced, the Attorney General announced on Monday, additional steps they've been considering. We'll let them announce any legal actions, of course, from their end. Hope to hear more soon. But this is certainly consistent with the president's call for urgency and for action to protect women's health care in Texas.
Lawsuit announced today?
We'll see. We'll leave it to the Department of Justice to announce any specific details or plans.
All right. So the White House asked for several members of these military academy advisory boards to resign or they would be removed. Many have refused to resign. So what happens to them now?
Well, we're confident in our legal abilities here, but I will tell you, John, no one's looking to have a battle here. The President of the United States, just as every president and every administration and cabinet members, have the right to appoint people they deem as qualified, as aligned with the administration's viewpoint, priorities to these boards and to any position in the federal government, and that's what we're really talking about here. But we're confident in our right to make new decisions about who serves on these boards.
Traditionally, these appointees do serve out their full 3-year term, though. Why is there no distinction between the likes of Kellyanne Conway or Sean Spicer, political operatives, and Megan Mobbs, who we had on earlier in the show, or even General McMaster, who is receiving an award from West Point later this week? Why no distinction?
Well, look, again, this really goes back to what every president's right is, which is to appoint individuals they choose because they're aligned with their values, because they're aligned with the qualifications that they deem for any of these positions and any of these boards. And that's what is taking place here. It's not personal. I will say that there are some people, of course, on these boards who have supported or stood by silently while their former boss supported an insurrection. That's not really okay with us either. But you're right. There's a span of individuals on these boards. It's really not more complicated than the president, his cabinet and team wanting to be able to appoint a fresh layer of people.
As far as you're concerned, are they effectively off the boards now? Have they been fired from these boards as of this morning?
Well, they've certainly been, it's been conveyed to them, as you know, yesterday, that they were asked to resign. In terms of their exact status this morning, I don't have an update, but again, we're confident in our legal capacity here.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, thanks for being with us this morning.
Thank you.